It was a Thursday evening, and I was sitting in the car, staring at my phone. I had just received a message, an innocuous message at first glance, but as I read it, the words seemed to burn into my skin. I wasn't sure if I should respond, or if I even could. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, but tonight felt different. I'd been down this road before, but tonight, I had a choice to make. But let me backtrack a bit, because you need to understand how I ended up in this position, a man torn between two impossible paths. This wasn't about my wife, Layla, or our history. It wasn't about the happy moments or the long nights talking about our dreams. It was about something far more raw, far more urgent. Something that would change everything. The message was simple. Do you really want to know? I didn't respond right away. My hands were shaking as I looked at the screen. I could hear my heart thudding in my chest, the sound of it filling the entire car. The streetlights outside flickered as if time itself was stalling, waiting for me to make a decision. I should have ignored it. I should have deleted it and moved on with my life. But there was something inside me that told me I couldn't. I couldn't let it go. Let's be clear about one thing. I was never the type of guy to dig into things I didn't need to know. I had lived my life with a sense of quiet satisfaction, coasting along, letting things unfold as they would. I didn't need drama. I didn't need secrets. I had my routine, my job, my evenings, my quiet nights at home with Layla, the woman I had been with for over 6 years. Life was stable, predictable, but that stability had been crumbling for months now, and I had just been too blind to see it. The first sign came when Layla stopped talking about our future. It wasn't something she consciously did, but I noticed it. The excited conversations about where we wanted to live next, or the plans for that dream vacation we always talked about, just stopped. She was still around, but she wasn't there. I thought maybe it was just a phase. She had been working longer hours, and I had been distracted by the usual grind of my own work. And yet, that night in the car, as I read that message, I felt a sense of finality. Like it was all coming together. Like this was the moment. I'd never been particularly insecure, but this was different. This was a new kind of fear. The message wasn't coming from some random stranger. It wasn't a warning from a friend or a family member. No, it was coming from someone close to me. Someone I never expected to be in this position with. But to understand that, I need to tell you about the key player in this story, the one who had been lurking in the background the entire time, invisible to everyone but me. It wasn't a lover. It wasn't an affair. At least, not in the conventional sense. It wasn't about what most people would think when they hear the word betrayal. This was something much more complicated, much more subtle. A betrayal of trust, of understanding, of everything I thought I knew about myself. It was the friend. The one you never expect. Chris. Chris had been my best friend for years. We met in college, and though our lives had taken different paths, him, working at a startup, me, running a small tech consulting firm, we remained close. We'd hang out on weekends, grab beers after work, catch up on life. Nothing unusual, just two guys who understood each other. Or so I thought. Now, I know what you're thinking. Best friends can't betray each other, right? That's not how this works. But let me tell you, this was something far more insidious. Something that I hadn't seen coming. Chris had been coming over to the house more often in recent months. At first, it seemed innocent enough, just a guy catching up with an old friend. But slowly, I began to notice the way Layla was looking at him. It was subtle at first, an extra second of eye contact, a slight smile that lingered a little too long. She wasn't obvious about it, but it was there, like a faint echo. I didn't think much of it, of course. I trusted Layla. I trusted Chris. But then came the moment I couldn't ignore. It happened 2 weeks before the message. I had come home early from work one afternoon, hoping to surprise Layla. I let myself in through the garage, as I usually did, but as I stepped into the living room, I stopped dead in my tracks. Layla and Chris were sitting on the couch, talking. Nothing unusual about that. But what was unusual was the way they were sitting. Too close. Too comfortable. Her hand was resting on his knee, and she was laughing. A real laugh. The kind she used to reserve for only me. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard in months. I felt my stomach twist. I stood there, frozen, watching the two of them, my mind trying to process what was happening in front of me. I should have said something right then. I should have confronted them, but I didn't. I just turned around and left. I got back in the car and drove around the block for an hour. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, what I was supposed to feel. When I came back, they were gone. Layla had gone to the store, and Chris had left as well. It was as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had. And that's when it all started to spiral. Layla had started to withdraw even more. And now, with the message from Chris sitting in my inbox, everything felt like it was falling apart in slow motion. I had a choice to make. I could keep ignoring what I had seen, pretending like everything was fine, or I could confront it. Confront them. Confront myself. I opened the message again. Do you really want to know? And that's when I realized I had no choice. I had to know. But what I didn't expect was the truth that would come crashing down on me. The choice I would be forced to make. And the decision that would change everything about the life I thought I knew. This was only the beginning. And nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed that Thursday evening were a blur of confusion and dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I kept trying to convince myself I was overthinking it. Maybe I was just paranoid. After all, I had no concrete evidence that Layla and Chris were anything more than friends. Sure, they had gotten closer, but they were just friends, right? But there was an uneasiness gnawing at me from within. I couldn't ignore it. Every time I saw Chris, it felt like I was looking at him through a new lens, one that was clouded with suspicion. I had known him for years, trusted him with almost everything. But now, every casual joke, every smile, every seemingly innocent moment between them felt like a thread in a tapestry of lies I hadn't been able to see until now. I kept thinking back to that moment when I walked in on them on the couch. How Layla's hand had lingered on his knee, how the laugh they shared had seemed so intimate, so familiar, and how it had been reserved for someone else. I didn't know what to do with that feeling. It wasn't just jealousy. It was something deeper, something darker. And the worst part was that I couldn't bring myself to confront it. I continued to go about my days, burying myself in work and pretending everything was fine at home. But at night, when the house was quiet and Layla was asleep beside me, I couldn't escape the nagging question. Was I losing her? Was I losing my best friend too? One evening, a week after the message, I decided I couldn't keep pretending. I had to find out the truth. So, I waited until Layla went to bed. I told her I had some work to finish up, but I really just needed the space to think. She didn't question it. She was tired, and I could tell she was worn out from everything that had been happening between us. I don't think she realized just how much her distance was hurting me, or maybe she did. Maybe it was part of her plan all along. With the house quiet, I pulled out my phone again. The message from Chris was still there, waiting. I could feel my palms sweating as I unlocked my phone and read it one more time. Do you really want to know? I took a deep breath and typed my response. Yes, I want to know. I wasn't prepared for what came next. Chris responded almost immediately. It's not what you think, Caleb, but you're too close to see it. I never wanted to hurt you, but I'm afraid it's too late. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. What did that even mean? Too late. What was he talking about? I felt my heart hammering in my chest as I waited for the next message. But instead, I just sat there, frozen, as if the words on the screen were somehow controlling me, pulling me into a nightmare I couldn't escape. It took what felt like an eternity before he finally replied again. Layla and I. That's all he wrote before the message abruptly cut off. I sat there in disbelief. What did that mean? What were they doing? My head was spinning as I tried to process it. I knew I had to find out, but part of me was afraid of what I would uncover. I didn't know if I could handle the truth, but I had to know. I couldn't live with the doubt gnawing at me anymore. I had to confront them, both of them. I grabbed my coat and headed out the door, determined to get the answers I needed. The drive to Chris's apartment felt like it took forever. Each second stretched out, and the tension in my chest only grew with every passing mile. I told myself I wasn't going there to start a confrontation. I just needed the truth. But deep down, I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. If there was something going on between Chris and Layla, I wasn't sure what I'd do. I wasn't sure I could handle it. When I arrived at Chris's apartment complex, my stomach twisted. I sat in the car for a few minutes, trying to gather the courage to get out. What was I even going to say? How do you confront someone you've trusted for so long? Someone who's been a part of your life for years? How do you ask a question that could shatter everything? I eventually forced myself out of the car and walked toward the building. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the weight of the decision I was about to make was physically pressing down on me. When I reached Chris's door, I didn't knock. I just opened it. The door was unlocked, which, in hindsight, was strange. But in that moment, It felt like the universe was pushing me forward. I stepped inside. The apartment was dark, save for the soft glow of the TV in the corner. I heard voices coming from the living room, and when I turned the corner, I saw them. Layla was sitting on the couch, her back to me, her head resting on Chris's shoulder. They were both laughing, but when Layla saw me, her face instantly dropped. Chris quickly straightened up, and they both froze, caught in a moment that felt like a scene out of a nightmare. "Caleb," Layla said softly, her voice shaking. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, my mind racing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout. But I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at them, feeling a sickening mix of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. Chris stood up and turned toward me, his face looking like he had just been caught in a lie he couldn't escape. "Look, Caleb." "No." I cut him off, my voice hoarse. "I've seen enough. I don't need you to explain. I get it." I felt a cold rush of air wash over me as the weight of the situation finally settled in. The truth, the painful truth, was now out in the open, and I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how long I stood there, my mind spinning, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The room seemed to shrink around me, the walls pressing in, suffocating me. The last few months, the doubts, the feeling of something being off, it all made sense now, but it still didn't feel real. Chris and Layla were just staring at me, their faces filled with guilt, but also a kind of resignation. It wasn't the look of people caught in a mistake. It was the look of people who knew they had crossed a line, and now they were waiting for me to react. They knew this wasn't something that could be undone. Finally, I found my voice, though it felt distant, like it didn't even belong to me. "How long?" I asked, my voice quiet but cutting through the silence. "How long has this been going on?" Layla looked down at the floor, her hands wringing together in a nervous gesture. She couldn't meet my eyes. Chris, on the other hand, stepped forward, like he was ready to say something, to explain. But I didn't want explanations. I didn't want their excuses. I didn't want any of it. "Caleb," Chris started, his voice shaky. "Look, don't." I interrupted, my anger rising. I wasn't ready for any more words from him. "Just tell me, how long has it been happening?" There was a pause, a long, unbearable silence. I could feel my heart beating louder than ever, like it was trying to escape my chest. I felt like I was being suffocated by the weight of everything that had just been thrown at me. Chris glanced at Layla, as if asking her for permission to speak. She nodded, her face pale, lips trembling. Finally, she looked at me. "It started a few months ago, after everything between us began to feel distant." Her voice broke on the last word, and I could see the guilt written all over her face. I felt like I had been slapped. A few months ago, that was when it started. I couldn't believe it. We had been married for 6 years. 6 years of my life, and she had been sneaking around with my best friend for months. I didn't know how to process that. Chris stepped in again, this time more forcefully. "Caleb, you have to understand." "I understand perfectly." I cut him off, my voice louder now, my fists clenched. "You're telling me that after everything we've been through, everything I've done for both of you, this is how you repay me? You think I wouldn't find out? You think I wouldn't eventually see it?" Layla's eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't say anything. I didn't need her to. I had already made up my mind. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The betrayal was too much, too deep. But then, something strange happened. A calmness washed over me. It wasn't peace, but it was a kind of clarity. For the first time in months, I wasn't confused. I wasn't drowning in a sea of unanswered questions. I knew exactly what had happened. I knew exactly what needed to be done. I turned to leave the apartment. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get out of there. I couldn't look at them anymore. I couldn't stand to hear any more excuses. I needed space, and I needed it now. But just as I reached the door, Layla's voice stopped me. "Caleb, please," she called out softly, her voice breaking. "Please don't go like this. We can talk. We can fix this." I froze. I felt her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Fix this? How could we fix this? How could she even ask that after everything? I wanted to scream, to yell at her, to tell her how much she had shattered everything I thought was real. But I didn't. I just stood there. The silence between us was deafening. "Fix this," I repeated, slowly turning around. My voice was cold now, almost unrecognizable. "You think this can be fixed? You think we can just go back to how things were? After everything you've done? After everything he's done?" I couldn't even look at Chris anymore. His face, his presence, it all felt like a betrayal. Like everything in my life had been a lie. I never meant for this to happen, Layla whispered, tears streaming down her face. I never wanted to hurt you. But the words meant nothing now. The damage was done. I'm done, I said, my voice finally steady, even though I could feel the fury building inside me. I'm done with this. I'm done with you both. With that, I walked out the door. I didn't turn around. I didn't look back. The hardest part of leaving wasn't walking away. It was the realization that I had spent so much time trusting the wrong people, investing my life in a marriage that had been crumbling beneath me for so long. But even though I was angry, even though I was devastated, I knew one thing. I had made the right choice. The truth had come to light, and I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't pretend anymore. As I drove away, I could feel the weight of the decision starting to sink in. I had lost Layla. I had lost Chris. And for the first time, I realized that I hadn't just lost them. I had lost myself. The road ahead was uncertain. I didn't know what I was going to do next. I didn't know how to rebuild. But I knew this. Whatever came next, it was going to be on my terms. I would have to learn how to live without them. The night I left their apartment, I didn't go home. I couldn't. My mind was racing too fast, my thoughts too tangled, and I knew that if I went back to that house, I would drown in the suffocating silence of it all. So I drove. For hours. I didn't have a destination, didn't have a plan. I just needed to escape. To get away from them. To get away from myself. I found myself at a late-night diner. The kind of place that never closes, where the flickering neon sign outside buzzes in the background as the smell of burnt coffee and greasy food fills the air. It wasn't a place I would normally go, but in that moment, it felt like the only place that wouldn't ask questions. I sat in a booth by the window, staring out into the dark night, barely noticing the waitress who had come to take my order. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. All I knew was that my life had just been ripped apart, and nothing seemed real anymore. The worst part was that even in that moment, I still couldn't wrap my head around the idea that Layla and Chris had done this to me. They were my closest people, my wife and my best friend, and somehow, they had become strangers, people I couldn't recognize anymore. A few hours later, I found myself back in my car, still staring blankly ahead. I drove aimlessly, my thoughts still a mess. I kept asking myself how I had missed the signs. How had I not seen this coming? Layla and I had talked about everything. Our hopes, our dreams, the future we wanted together. She had always been so affectionate, so involved. How had it all fallen apart without me noticing? How had Chris, my best friend, been able to get so close to her without me suspecting anything? I don't know how long I kept driving, but I ended up on the outskirts of the city, at a small park that I used to visit when I was younger. The park was quiet, the swings swaying slightly in the breeze, and the silence felt strangely comforting. I parked the car and stepped out, taking a deep breath of the cool night air. I needed clarity. I needed space. I needed something to ground me. But nothing could ground me. The truth had already started to take hold. The foundation of my life had crumbled, and I couldn't rebuild it. Not now. Not when I had been lied to. Not when the people I trusted most had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I spent the rest of the night at the park, walking aimlessly, thinking about everything. About Layla. About Chris. About how they had betrayed me. And about how I had no idea where to go from here. When the sun started to rise, casting a pale light over the empty swings, I realized that I couldn't go back. Not to the life I had. It was gone now, forever. The next few days were a blur. I went back to the apartment I had rented, not bothering to unpack any of my things. I wasn't ready to settle in. I wasn't ready to face what had happened. I didn't know what to say to anyone. Friends, family, people I had known for years. Everyone I knew was a reminder of the life I had lost. I didn't speak to Layla. I couldn't. Not yet. There was nothing she could say to make things better. She had already chosen. And I had already made my choice, too. I wasn't going to go back to that life. I wasn't going to pretend like everything was okay. But as much as I wanted to cut her off completely, there was still a part of me that missed her. Missed the woman I had once known, the woman I thought I would grow old with. That thought gnawed at me every single day. How could someone go from being everything to nothing in such a short amount of time? How could someone betray you like that and still expect you to just move on? One evening, just as I was about to close my eyes and finally try to get some rest, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Layla. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to know what she had to say, but something inside me urged me to read it. So I did. The message was simple, just a few lines. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I don't know how things got so messed up. I want to talk. Please. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. She wanted to talk. Of course she did. She always did. But that was the problem, wasn't it? She wanted to fix things, but what was there to fix? What could we say to undo the hurt? To undo the lies? I didn't respond. I couldn't. But as the days dragged on, I found myself thinking about that message. Thinking about everything I had left behind. The house. The memories. The life we had built. I had been so focused on my own anger, my own pain, that I hadn't stopped to think about what Layla was going through. What Chris was going through. They were the ones who had betrayed me, but now, I was the one stuck in this purgatory of indecision, unsure of what I wanted. I knew deep down that I couldn't go back. I couldn't forgive them for what they had done, but part of me still wondered if there was a way to make peace with the situation. To find a way to move on without all the bitterness and regret. I wasn't ready to answer Layla's message. Not yet. I needed more time. But I knew that eventually, I would have to face her. And when I did, I would have to make a decision, one that would change everything. What would I do? Would I walk away completely, leaving everything behind? Or would I try to salvage something from the wreckage? I didn't know. But I knew that whatever decision I made, it would be the hardest one of my life. The aftermath had only just begun. I spent the next few days lost in a haze of confusion and anger. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next, or even how to move forward. It was like the ground beneath me had cracked open, and now I was just waiting for it to swallow me whole. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to hear their pity, their sympathy. Everyone had always seen me as the guy who had it together, the dependable one, the responsible one. But now, all of that felt like a joke. I didn't answer Layla's message. I didn't even look at my phone most of the time. It felt like anything I touched was tainted by the lies, the betrayal. But then, one night, as I sat alone in the small apartment I had rented, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen, and for a moment, I hesitated. It was a call from Layla. I knew I should ignore it. I knew I should keep avoiding her, keep hiding from the reality of everything. But something inside me made me answer. Something inside me needed closure, even if I wasn't ready for what was coming. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe an apology, maybe some kind of explanation that would make everything make sense. But when I pressed accept, I wasn't prepared for her voice. Caleb. Her voice cracked. She sounded tired, broken, like someone who had been carrying a weight they couldn't bear for far too long. I'm here, I said, my voice flat. I didn't want to sound cold, but I couldn't help it. My heart was still in pieces, and I wasn't sure I could pick them up. There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing on the other end, like she was trying to find the right words, or maybe just trying to find the strength to speak at all. I don't know where to start, she said finally. I don't know how to make things right between us, but I need you to know something. I leaned back in the chair, gripping the phone tighter. What is it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I never meant for it to happen, Caleb. I never meant for it to go this far. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the image of her with Chris, of the laughter they had shared, of the way they had looked at each other. You say that, Layla. You say you didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. It did, and now everything is ruined. How am I supposed to believe you? There was another long silence, but this time, it wasn't just her. I could feel myself holding my breath, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had to ask. It was eating me alive. Why him? I finally whispered. Why Chris? Of all people, why him? Her voice faltered. I don't have an excuse, Caleb. There's no reason that makes sense. There's no excuse that will make it right. I was unhappy, and I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to tell you that. I let it go too far, and I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. It was the first time she had admitted it, that she had been unhappy. It was the first time I had heard her say the words, but it didn't change the fact that she had made a choice. She had chosen to hide it, to bury it, to allow herself to get lost in whatever was happening with Chris instead of confronting the issues between us. I could feel my chest tightening, the anger rising, but something else, something deeper, started to creep in as well. Hurt. Real, raw hurt. You had so many chances, Layla. So many chances to talk to me, to tell me that things weren't right. But instead, you kept it all to yourself. You let it build, and you let it explode in the worst possible way. I know, she whispered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was afraid. I was afraid of what it would do to you, to us. But now I see that keeping it to myself was worse. I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her everything I had been feeling, the anger, the betrayal, the disbelief. But another part of me, the part that was still holding on to what we had, just wanted to hear her say it. To hear her say that she was sorry, that she regretted everything. But I had to face the truth. The truth was that no amount of apologies would take back what had been done. No amount of regret would fix the damage. What now, Layla? I asked, my voice rough with emotion. What happens now? Where do we go from here? There was another pause. I could feel the weight of her decision, the heavy burden she carried, pressing down on me. I don't know, she said softly. I wish I had the answer. But I can't change what happened. I can't undo it. All I can do is ask you for forgiveness. But I understand if that's not something you can give me. The phone call ended soon after, and for a long time, I just sat there in the quiet apartment, staring at the screen. The words she had said to me, her apology, her regret, hung in the air like a distant echo, but they didn't feel like enough. Nothing she could say would change what had happened. The betrayal was too deep, the hurt too raw. But at the same time, I found myself wondering, could I forgive her? Could I find a way to let go of the anger, the resentment, and rebuild something from the wreckage? Or had she broken something in me that couldn't be fixed? I didn't know the answer. Not yet. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep running from the reality of it all. Whatever I decided to do next, I would have to face it head on. There was no turning back. The days after the phone call dragged on like the slowest of moments, a stretch of time that seemed endless, as if the world had decided to pause just to make sure I understood the full weight of what had happened. I had gone over the conversation with Layla in my head 100 times, replaying every word, every hesitation in her voice. The rawness in her apology had been real. She wasn't the same person she had been when I first met her, and I wasn't the same person either. We had both changed. We had both done things that couldn't be undone. But there was something else in that phone call that stuck with me. Something I couldn't shake. I couldn't deny that part of me still cared about her. No matter how much pain she had caused, no matter how much betrayal had eaten away at the trust we once had, there was still a piece of me that wanted to believe we could fix it, that we could rebuild, that maybe, just maybe, we could salvage something from the wreckage. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how naive that was. Layla had crossed a line, and so had Chris. What they had done, what they had shared, was something that could never be forgotten. The intimacy they had developed, the secrecy that had been between them, had all been built on lies. And no amount of apologies or regret would erase the fact that they had chosen each other over me. I spent a lot of time thinking about Chris too. He had been my closest friend for years, the one person who knew everything about me, the good, the bad, the ugly. And I had trusted him with everything. But trust is a fragile thing, and once it's broken, it can never be repaired in the same way. I couldn't even bring myself to face him. He had crossed the line, and I knew there was no coming back from that. Still, in those quiet moments of doubt, when I was alone with my thoughts, I couldn't help but wonder if forgiveness was possible. If people like Layla and Chris could be forgiven, or if the hurt had run too deep for me to ever let go. I couldn't avoid the questions forever. They clawed at me, pulling me deeper into this turmoil. I found myself pacing around my apartment, looking at the empty walls, knowing that every corner of my life had been tainted. The silence in the room felt suffocating, like the weight of their betrayal was pressing down on me from all sides. I needed something to change. The turning point came one rainy afternoon, a week after the phone call. I had gotten into my car, intending to go to work, but the rain made everything feel too heavy. The world outside the windows was a blur of gray, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I wasn't ready to move on with my life. Not yet. I wasn't ready to just let it all slide by, to pretend I wasn't shattered. I didn't go to work that day. Instead, I drove to the place where I used to find peace. The park by the lake. It had been years since I had visited, but something about it felt like a lifeline. It felt like the last place I could go to clear my head, to figure out what I needed to do. The park was almost empty when I arrived, save for a few people walking their dogs or jogging along the path. I parked the car and sat for a while, just watching the rain fall in steady sheets. The sound of the water hitting the pavement, the trees swaying gently in the wind, It should have been calming. But instead, it just made me feel more isolated. The world felt distant, like I was watching it from behind glass. I couldn't touch it. I couldn't be part of it. And then I saw them. Chris and Layla. I hadn't expected it. They hadn't seen me. But there they were, standing on the bridge overlooking the lake. They were talking quietly, their heads bent close together. It was like a cruel twist of fate, the universe throwing this moment in my face. I wanted to look away. I wanted to drive off, to avoid this moment like I had avoided so many others. But I couldn't. I just couldn't turn away. For a moment, I thought about walking over to them, confronting them, demanding answers, making them face me. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. They were already too far gone. Instead, I sat there, watching them. Layla laughed at something Chris said, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. I had heard that laugh before. I had heard it when it was just the two of us. I had heard it when she was mine. And now, she was giving it to him. A laugh that used to belong to me, that used to belong to our life. I couldn't do this. I couldn't keep watching them. This life I had lost slipping further away with every passing second. I turned away and drove off, not looking back. That night, I didn't sleep. The images of them together replayed in my mind, like a broken record I couldn't turn off. I kept wondering what had gone wrong, where I had missed the signs, why they couldn't just have been honest with me, why they had felt the need to hide their affair, to betray me, to ruin everything we had built. But in the end, I knew the answer. They had made their choice. And now, it was my turn. I had to make a choice too. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, torn between the past and the future. I couldn't keep questioning everything. And so, I made the decision to face them, to end it, once and for all. I texted Layla later that night, the words still echoing in my mind as I typed them out. I can't keep doing this, Layla. We can't keep pretending. I've made my choice. It's over. I hit send before I could think about it. And as I stared at the message on the screen, I realized something. This was the hardest thing I had ever done. But it was the only way I could move on. It took hours for Layla to respond to my message. Every minute felt like a lifetime. I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone resting on my knee, eyes flicking between the screen and the empty room around me. The silence felt suffocating. The weight of the decision I had just made settled heavily on my chest. I could feel the ache of finality in my bones, but there was something else too. A small, quiet part of me that wondered if I had made the right choice. But then the message came through. Caleb, please, don't do this. We need to talk. I know I've hurt you, but I swear, it wasn't like that. It wasn't what you think. I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the reply button. She had said that before, hadn't she? That it wasn't like that. That it wasn't what I thought. But the truth was, it was exactly what I thought. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything that led up to it. The lies, the secrets, the years of silence between us. All of it had led to this point. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I put the phone down and got up from the bed, walking around the room as if I could outrun the decision that hung in the air. The room felt too small now. It felt like a cage, like a place that had once been mine but was now tainted with the memories of someone I didn't know anymore. As the hours passed, I thought about the message again. We need to talk. I knew what that meant. I knew what she was asking. But what could we talk about? Could anything change between us after everything that had happened? Could I look at her the same way again? I decided to call her. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. Caleb, are you okay? I didn't know how to answer that. Was I okay? No, I wasn't okay. But that was the least of it. I'm not okay, Layla, I said, my voice rough. How could I be? You and Chris. I don't know who you are anymore. I don't know who we are anymore. She was silent for a moment, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. I know I messed up, she said, her voice breaking. I know I hurt you, and I'm so sorry for that. But I never wanted to lose you. I never meant for any of this to happen. The apology wasn't enough anymore. The words felt hollow, empty, like they were just a way to avoid facing the truth of what had happened. I had heard her say that 100 times already, and it didn't change the reality that lay in front of me. I don't know if I can forgive you, Layla, I said, feeling the weight of those words as I said them out loud. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. Her voice cracked. I understand. I do. But I need you to know that I love you. I've always loved you. And I still do. I don't want to lose you over this. Please, please don't walk away from me. I could hear the desperation in her voice, the way she was clinging to the thread of something she thought we still had. But I was no longer sure it was something worth saving. I didn't know if there was a way back from the place we had ended up. You don't get it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You've already lost me. You've lost me, Layla. You don't get to decide what happens now. I do. There was a long pause, and in that silence, I realized how final this moment was. I had made my choice, and there was no going back. Caleb, she said, her voice barely audible now. Please, don't do this. But it was done. The truth was, the damage was beyond repair. Our foundation had cracked, and there was no way to rebuild it. I had tried for so long to hold on, to make things work, but I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine when it wasn't. I couldn't pretend that I didn't feel the weight of the betrayal every time I looked at her. I'm sorry, Layla, I said, the words feeling like a release. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending. I've made my decision. I ended the call without waiting for a response, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I knew I couldn't keep dragging this out. I couldn't keep living in the limbo between holding on and letting go. I had to make the choice to let go, and it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy at all. The hours that followed felt like I was walking through a fog. I wasn't sure what was next. I wasn't sure what life looked like without her, without them. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep living in this place of uncertainty. I couldn't keep wondering what could have been when I knew the reality of what was. The hardest part wasn't making the decision. It was accepting that it was the right one. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't go back to the past. I couldn't keep dragging myself through the pain of it all. I had to face forward, even if I had no idea where I was going. The only thing I knew was that I couldn't keep holding on to something that was already gone. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't peace, but it was clarity. For the first time, I knew where I stood. I knew that the hardest part was behind me. The rest of it, the healing, the rebuilding, the moving on, that would come later. But for now, I had made my choice. And that was the first step toward finding myself again. Days turned into weeks, and as the weight of the decision I'd made began to settle, something remarkable started to happen. The storm of emotions that had battered me in the wake of Layla's betrayal slowly began to quiet. The deep ache in my chest, the crushing sense of loss, it didn't disappear overnight, but it softened. I had expected the pain to linger, to suffocate me, but instead, I found moments of clarity, of peace I hadn't felt in months. I was free, in a way, even though it didn't feel like it at first. I focused on myself. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to hide behind the mask of a perfect life that wasn't real. I started doing the things I had pushed aside for so long, things that made me feel whole again. I spent time with old friends, laughed in a way I hadn't in ages, and rediscovered hobbies I had left behind. I found myself in the small, quiet moments, in the peace of solitude, in the stillness of the morning when the world had yet to stir. I had learned something important. Life doesn't stop when it hurts. You don't stop living just because things go wrong. You pick yourself up. You move forward. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And as I moved forward, I began to see the world differently. I realized that healing wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about learning how to live with the cracks, how to rebuild from the pieces, and how to move on without carrying the weight of the past with you. One afternoon, a few months after everything had settled, I found myself walking along the lake once more, the same park where everything had fallen apart. The rain had stopped, and the sun was low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the water. As I walked along the path, I noticed someone sitting by the bench, staring out at the horizon. It was Chris. I froze for a moment. Seeing him felt like a punch to the gut, and for a second, I thought about walking away. But then I remembered. I remembered that I wasn't the person I had been before. I wasn't going to let fear, or anger, or bitterness control me anymore. I wasn't the same person who had walked away from everything in that apartment, full of rage and hurt. So, I walked over to him, my footsteps steady. He looked up when I approached, his face tight with regret, but also a kind of vulnerability I hadn't expected to see. He stood up, clearly unsure of how to act, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and longing for the friendship we had once shared. "I didn't expect you to come here," he said quietly, his voice rough. "I don't blame you if you hate me." "I don't hate you, Chris," I said, the words surprising even me. I thought I would be filled with anger, but the truth was, I didn't hate him. I was hurt, yes, but I didn't need that kind of negativity in my life anymore. I don't think I ever could. I need you to understand that what happened between us is over. And I'm not trying to forget, but I'm also not going to keep carrying it. He nodded, his shoulders slumping as if a weight had lifted from him. I've been so ashamed of myself. I can't change what I did, Caleb. I've tried to fix things in my head 100 different ways, but the truth is, I ruined everything. And I am sorry. I know, I said. I know you are. But I can't keep holding on to it. We both made mistakes. I don't have all the answers, but I know that I'm not going to let this define me. I'm learning to live again. There was a long pause, and for a moment, it felt like the world had stopped, like the two of us were frozen in time. Then, Chris gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. I'm glad to hear that, man. I really am. I'm glad too, I said. And for the first time in a long while, I meant it. I wasn't carrying the anger anymore. It wasn't gone, but it was fading. We stood there for a while, the sun finally breaking through the clouds, casting light over the water. It was strange how things could change, how life could shift with a single choice. That day, I realized that while some things in life are beyond our control, there's always a chance to choose the next step. I had chosen to let go of the past, to forgive, not for them, but for me. That was the moment I knew I was ready to move on. Not just from the betrayal, but from the hurt, from the anger, from the weight of it all. I was ready for a new chapter. As I walked away from Chris, the sun setting behind me, I felt the weight of the past lifting off my shoulders. I wasn't sure where life was taking me next, but I knew one thing for certain. I was going to be okay. More than okay. I was going to be better. Because I had learned that sometimes, the most difficult decisions lead to the most beautiful beginnings. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.